Well, you know, I've never been one for those unboxings. Somehow, watching the teddy bear come out of the box doesn't really add to the teddy bear, but hey, we may as well be thorough and start at the beginning. We've already undone one box, so not a true unboxing, but this is the kit from Rebel Racing to convert the early 911s, like this 76, which has been wide-bodied and a bunch of other things. We're going to convert it to use the 996 or Boxter S 4-piston calipers. And so here we have most of the kit: the front and rear hoses, the caliper adapter brackets, the top-notch hardware to install everything to the standard spacing as far as the caliper mountings. And then, of course, we got the big new front rotors with the hats. But here we go with the rear rotors. Let's make that with the drum brake provision. Thank you very much, Porsche, from the 1970s. Nice little grouping there in the sunlight in front of our project in waiting, of course. In the meantime, we've managed to turn the car around. I figured we'd start on the front brakes. So, Rebel Racing says these kits are complete. All you need to provide are a pair of 996 or Boxter S calipers. Apparently the Boxter S ones are desirable because, like these, they're red. These are used. I understand it was a early 2000s Boxter S that had pretty low miles, but what I gather, it was purchased maybe at an auction, maybe a theft recovery or something, to be parted out, and it was off a running, working car. You see the rotors with the hats, which I guess are one of the trick bits that let you use the standard hub. Excuse you, Umby. So apparently, in days gone by, you could do this kit, but you had to get some kind of 944 hub and machine something or other. This kit here provides these hats and rotors, and these adapt to the existing hubs, making this kit very sleek indeed. Let me do some shuffling and some raising up of car, and we'll have a look at some bits in more detail. And so it seems the modern type, if you've seen, you see these on eBay, Camaros apparently use a very similar type. A lot of the American muscle cars have moved to these Brembos, and they're a one-piece casting, so they're pretty sleek. 4-piston, and it seems that all of the mountings go from directly above on these newer ones. And so the adapter bracket, of course, converts it to mount sideways, motorcycle fork style, if you will. Let's take a look at the way we jack this car. It's almost 50 years old, so idiots have gone at it. There's a couple little dings here on that cross member, so I use a 2x4 trusty hydraulic jack. These are pretty well recommended points for jack stands. I try to position it such that it's not just sitting on the bolt. And in fact, one of the Cooper Road Mini tricks developed through years of working on Mini Coopers and jacking up all sorts of cars in all kinds of conditions. You can take the tension out of any jacking point. And I've had these old motorcycle rotors laying around. They work nicely when I'm outdoors as well. But you can see that if there's any kind of tension in that, again, this is not fully released, but it doesn't have a lot of weight on it. We're making sure we're safe and evenly supported all around. All right, we'll take the wheels off, and then we'll take a look at all these goodies and where they'll go. Just to show that it really is me doing it. Well, certainly these are cast iron calipers all around, and they're a twin piston style. They look, I've seen the aluminum ones for sale on Pelican, and they look the same, the way that the two halves attach in the earlier generation style, but these are iron. Now these brakes work fine, there's no leak, and in fact I resurrected this car after it sat in a little canvas storage for 10 or more years, and I haven't even added brake fluid. If we look at the style of the new hoses, they're a banjo style, and so that mounts to the side of the caliper thusly. Now there's one little trick bit here, given that these are from a Boxster. As I understand it, this is, thank you very much Clint, the details. The Boxster mounted the calipers on the back side of the front wheels. And so what we need to do here is to switch these interconnecting brake lines for the bleeders, such that the bleeders are at the top, and the piston, the caliper's on in the right order, being that the larger piston is the leading one. So let's undo what we have here. This one here, of course, mounts in the conventional way with the 2 bolts, 3.5-inch spacing. We can see how the hose runs to a bracket here on the strut, and then has a metal line to the caliper. On the wheel, we can see more of the caliper. And we can maybe better see the inside mounting bolts. Yep. Well, as we all know, too much detail can just be a little too tedious to watch. And you can see I'm just showing some of the basic steps. We've broken loose the 2 caliper mounting bolts down there that go to the 3.5-inch spaced lugs on the strut. And we've snuck our hydraulic little fitting wrenches. We'll put a little drain pan here and proceed with undoing the hoses. We'll undo the metal connecting hose right here and remove the entire caliper and brake shoe assembly. All right, so just by jiggling the caliper on its mount, you can unload the threads of the mounting bolts. There's 1. 2. Let's take a look at what comes off. There's probably some wear grooves. Yeah, there's the whole thing. You can see it actually. Brake pads, I keep calling them shoes. Wow, they're a much smaller surface, that's for sure, than these huge replacements. But nice even wear, and probably about at least half of it remaining. But yeah, these are pretty heavy, you know, old style, 2-piston cast iron, but still working after all these. I mean, if they're original, they're 49 years old. So I'd say they did the job quite well. All right, by just sort of hanging this on the hub here, we can see how much bigger this rotor is all around. Really striking difference when you put it next to it. Well, let me remove the bearing, the cap here, and the hub, and then we'll really have a look at all the bits, clean them up, and install the new bracketry. All right, so like I do for my Cooper Road Mini projects on YouTube, I've never done this before, and so usually the way I try to go about things is, if I'm taking something apart I've never seen before, you know, the first thing is not to break it, not to damage it. And so you approach it gently and try and figure out how things are held together. Now these things here, a lot of times you can just grab them with a channel lock, move them back and forth. This one was a little tight. A trick I've used before is to just gently go around, and yeah, you're hitting it at a slight angle, but we're able to move it. We just kind of roll through. The idea being that we dislodge it from that center, and of course the further we go out, the more bite we have, the better the angle gets. And you can see here that we're walking it outward gently. Look at that. Right, a very quick inspection quickly shows you what this slot is for. Well, that didn't take much. You can see I just backed that off a little bit. We'll see what the rest of it looks like. It's like a slotted locating washer. Yeah, let's use both hands and not have anything suddenly fall out and land on our foot. And sure enough, just prying off the thin little washer, pulling it back here, we can see that we have the clearance. I had to just kind of lightly bolt up the new caliper to get an idea of where it's going to sit. I put the mounting bracket, the adapter bracket, on the back side. Again, everything's just hand tight. So this, it looks like you could probably get away with using this dust shield. I tend not to like them. You know, for things like this, it's easier to inspect without it. You're less likely to pick up a pebble, or I have a bit of a dirt road and a bit of a farmer Fred of a neighbor. And so that's about all the off-roading that this car will likely see. And, you know, yes, a factory will put things like that on because they don't know how you're going to use it. But let's face it, most of us who have something like this aren't really gonna Dukes of Hazzard it. And so I'm gonna take this off, look at the condition. At worst, I'll clean it up, paint it, put it back on if I decide to use it. And so with the dust shield removed and the grease wiped off, we can really see what lovely condition the spindle is in. Wow, it looks almost new. I made a jig and sealed up the grease hub of this and bead blasted it. It was a lot easier and did a much nicer job. This thing looks brand new. These things are amazing. They're so light. These hubs weigh about half what the old classic Mini Cooper ones weigh, if you can imagine, for the Porsche 911. Quick look over here at the beginning of assembling the new rotors and the hats. And what's interesting about this is I believe these are standard fasteners. I don't think these are metric. The nuts are 3/8 rather than 10 millimeter. And these look to be 5/16 24. They're locking nuts because you can't put them on by hand past the thread. But we'll assemble those carefully. They give you conveniently here. Tells you which way to put them. You want to put the flanged nuts against the aluminum hats on this side and bring the head of the Allen screw from below, from the steel side with the rotor mount. All right, so as we're getting ready for the final assembly here, details. You know, take a few minutes to clean the mating surfaces. You got a nice piece of anodized aluminum machined piece here that's going to provide the support for your front brake calipers. You tighten this onto some of this 50-year-old baked on. And you know, things aren't as tight as you think as you drive along. This is brakes, folks. We're going to pay attention to all these details. All right, so on final assembly for driving it, I showed cleaning up the surfaces, and I did even more of that I didn't show. But now, a matter of putting it together. I don't have torque specs, but I've got I've put hundreds of calipers on. I've got a good sense of how tight these were coming off, the size of the hardware, 30 to 40 foot-pounds or so. You can see what I'm using for now. 10 millimeter was not to be had in a socket that I could find at this moment. And so using common sense and keeping in mind that it's better to go back and verify all of this later after driving it a bit. The same goes for the progress over here. It's better to go back and check all of these for tightness after driving it than to worry overly about, is it 23 foot-pounds or 22 and a half? You know, if you got a good sense about how tight these things should be, you don't even need any fancy tools, so to speak. This is pretty straightforward stuff. Then we've cleaned up. In our case, I'm reusing the hardware that held the rotor to the hub, carefully inspected and cleaned. Well, if you've ever packed wheel bearings, you know that this part here is difficult to show. You don't have a hand that isn't covered in grease, so there's no way to hold the phone. But take my word for it. The wheel bearings carefully inspected, everything as clean as can be, repacked, and this is such an elegant method of doing these. I've spent countless hours on the Mini Coopers where they use a spacer arrangement in the wheel bearings, and I'll tell you what, nobody can make the parts consistently enough that the spacer is the right size. You end up screwing around trying to get the tension on the bearings. This is a lovely, elegant setup, and you know, putting back the same bearings, this is pretty much in the same place, the same orientation. So tightening that up and putting the protective, keep clean cover over it completes the installation of the rotor. Hey, this could be interesting. A little aside here during our installation. Of course, this is the highly accurate and uncalibrated, sometimes pressed into service postal scale. I don't know, would you call that 6 1/4? To the big 4-piston and the caliper that came off. What do we think? Oh my goodness. So the extra 2 pistons and the extra prettiness actually weighs about half as much. Who would have thought that this little dust shield I was going to put it on there and say, oh, this is negligible, but look at that, it weighs almost a pound. Let's see what happens here. Hey, 13 pounds, about what we guessed. Put the other one on here. It's considerably smaller. What do we have? 11.2. Now let's take a look at this. 18.2 pounds for the assembled rotor and hub. All right, this step is only necessary if your calipers came off a Boxter S. The 996 ones apparently are black, but I kind of wonder if there's not another difference here, because the way these metal lines fit against the casting, you can see how there's a little cutout here on the side that is not the top on the Boxster, but wants to be the top on the 911. And so we can see that over here it's a different shape, and it's possible, we'll just have to see how it fits, that this will sort of be kind of hanging off the edge here. All right, so it turned out I guessed kind of wrong on these little sensor wires. Well, the right idea, they are for some sort of light, but what it is, it just kind of clipped into the side of the brake pad, and as you wear this this piece here off, you must break an insulator and cause it to short and light up a light. But I didn't have to cut them. I was getting ready to chop them out of there. I go, I'm never going to put a light in this old car. You know, if you can't pay attention to your brakes wearing, you shouldn't be driving a car like this. There's plenty of Hondas and Nissans out here in the driveway that will tell you all sorts of things. Kept these oriented the way that they were on the car. But we can see I've reversed the connecting hose and the bleeders such that now that's the top. All right, let's look. Bearing hub, rotor, hat, all assembled together. And if we can just kind of run the camera through here, you can see a good reason for leaving that dust shield off is visibility of all this, and being able to get to the back side of these to hold the bolt and check the tightness on the front. So really at the end of the second day, these are, well, one wheel, the hardest one, figuring it all out, is pretty much all installed except for the hose. I haven't routed the hose, which is, there's where the line starts, and here's where the banjo has to go, back here. Just pull the brake pads back and install all of the spring mechanism. Much cleaner and simpler without the wires for the sensors. Well, in the sunlight of the next morning, and hey, look at that, I think it's the first day of spring. Let me show you the one issue that I found with the kit as supplied. It's just a fairly simple hardware issue, but it's not one that you can ignore. Last night I did install the flex hose, braided hose supplied with the kit. This end here, used the original clip, connected up absolutely perfectly fine. Over here though, what I ran into was the length of the threads of the banjo in combination with the thinness, if you will, of the copper crush washers provided, results in that bolt bottoming out inside the caliper before you can tighten it. Now, I haven't tried jamming it tight. Perhaps it'll work just enough, but that's not really a good way to proceed. Let me show you on the other one what's going on here. And so you can see that with the banjo screwed all the way in, it bottoms out inside the thread there. And you can see that the fitting still has wobble at the line there. Let me take this out and show you what's going on. The caliper is made to accept a fitting with an inverted flare. I should have brought my light, but if you can see in there, it's a cone-shaped base of that thread. And so what's going on is the shoulder of our banjo is bottoming out on that inverted flare seat, if you will. My best guess here is what happened with Rebel Racing is you can see that these little things, these are paper thin crush washers. And a quick search, in fact, showed that I had some nice new washers that had a bigger outside diameter as well and considerably thicker. But I'm still going to turn that down just a little bit because you really don't want to get a false sense of it being tight as you crush the copper when this runs out of travel. That's one of those things that can lead to a mystery leak, whereby you go, everything's tight, why should it be leaking? Well, you can't really tell that it's bottomed out here when you're maybe not quite crushing your copper washers. You say, well, you know, we have the kind of luck where if anything goes wrong, we find it. But the way we avoid that is by paying very close attention to all these sorts of details as we assemble things like brakes. You can see after just some minor cleanup with that grinding wheel, I've shortened about a thread off here and left a little rounded taper, as well as shortening the overall length of it. And in fact, I just verified that even with these super thin washers, I'm able to hand tighten that to where all of the wobble that I had previously in the line is gone. But still, I'm going to go ahead and use these nice, thicker, new crush washers. Well, of course, no job is complete until you put the wheel back on. And let me show you one other little thing here for which I already have a solution, but it's worth taking a quick look at. This little brake pipe that connects the two halves together. Remember I showed switching it over from the top in order to keep the orientation of the pistons correct for the right-left calipers and have the bleeder screws at the top. The information on Rebel Racing's site says that these kits will fit under 16-inch wheels using a half-inch spacer. And in fact, these are 17s, and they may not be the most common ones, but you know, it's a pretty tight fit. And in fact, this has a sort of a protective cover, if you will, over that little brake pipe. And you can see here that with 3 of the lug nuts put in, seating the wheel, it's dragging on what is this protective cover on these. However, quickly studying the situation here, and I haven't tried this because I literally just threw this wheel on, I thought, you know, let's check clearance here. Is this going to clear? The solution is going to be to switch right for left of the little pipe. Do you see how this sort of points toward the wheel in this orientation? It's supposed to hide in this little recess up here and be protected below the arc of the outer part of the rotor. Now this one here is a mirror image, and so it's my belief, just in studying this real quick, that I can take this connecting pipe, see how it orients inward when it's installed in the lower position, like I'm holding it here. And so it's my belief that I'll just be able to undo that again and switch right for left to put this in an orientation that gives it clearance from the spinning wheel. It'll end up sitting on this side of the bottom of the caliper. So, as we surmised with the wheel in place, these are a mirror image of each other. So I just took this one off, which, as we saw, stuck out over on this side, causing it to interfere with the rotation of the wheel. We can see that this one here, and the reason you can't just, you know, do them this way is because one side is actually higher than the other. So we can see, and if we install this in this orientation from the other side, it'll be well below the rotor, away from the spinning wheel. Let me put it in place and we'll have another look. All right, we can see once it's installed how it tucks in the way that the curve of the pipe, the way it's made, tucks it in below the kind of was sticking out in the plane of the rotation of the wheel there when it was the other sides. So the final result is you're going to take the one from the right side and put it over on the left side when we switch these top for bottom. So top for bottom and right for left. Well, the job is only as good as the details. And as I try to figure out how to route this brake hose, It does not fit through the existing opening, and that puts an awkward bend from there because remember the other hose just was kind of an S shape, a lot shorter. This one here, while it looks reasonable on this side, certainly with the suspension compressed as we meander around here, it's a it actually hits the tire. You can see there. So that's not going to work. All right, so routing it behind the strut, between the strut and the hub bearing, as it were, over here. And then the angle of the banjo fitting working its way behind the caliper instead of sticking out here where it runs the risk of catching on things. So this looks more elegant. Well, here's an interesting view from the inside, showing what I hope is the final hose routing. I'm running it behind the strut, making a gradual bend up to the fixed fitting up there. I like the look of that, but take a look at how close. This is a 17-inch wheel. This is, the brand is Racing Dynamics. A lot of people think they look like the rough wheels. I like them because they're an 8.5-inch front and 10-inch rear for this wide body, and I do like the 5-spoke style. But look how close this caliper is. I would not think there's a 1/2 inch of clearance there, and you can see why switching right for left of the metal line here, putting it underneath and out of the way of the rotating wheel, which otherwise that's an awfully tight fit in there. But nicely routed. I've just got this wheel lightly on just to check all the clearances and make sure the hose is safe. Now we'll tighten up all these fittings and see about bleeding these brakes. And look at that. 2 at a time. I just basically submerge the other end of the hose, or use one of these kits, and open the bleeder slightly, and work the brake pedal. So you can see we've already gotten the brake pads to close around the rotor, and then we can hear the nice, even, light scraping. So air is being worked out. It seems to work. Of course, I haven't really put it to a hard test. I don't know what the proportion front to rear and all that with only the fronts installed. But look at that. If you need to budget this job, I bet that it'll work okay. You know, you got to keep it in mind that you've replaced the fronts. But I think you can probably get away with doing this, with some time apart between the fronts and the rears. You get it working. And when you have time and weather and place and money, get to the rears.